Um, so yeah, to begin with, I wanted to start off thinking about video games in general, and so I was thinking just as a kind of way to get started, if you could like use the chat and just literally name some video games, maybe ones that you've been playing recently, or some of your favorite games of all time, or ones that you want to play. The next thing I always do is kind of think about what features make up a video game. So, for example, what I mean by this is if we think of something like film, then obviously there's a lot of things that make up a film, but as an example, you have like the use of camera, the way the lighting is used, music, the actors themselves, the story within the film. Um, so again, maybe pop in the chat just a few things that, and some of these will be overlapping in film and with other media as well. But if there's any things as well that you can think of that are more specific to video games, yeah, think about what, I guess, I don't know if features is the right word, but what things make up a video game. It's really interesting thinking about the different components of a video game. But a lot of these really are kind of present in a lot of different video games. So, you know, things like story, player inputs and controls, characters, the use of camera, animation, physics, interaction. I think this idea of the kind of the feedback system is important as well. So thinking about all these things, what then do you kind of need in place before you can actually play a game? And what I mean by that is like some things like, for example, animation. You could play a game that wasn't animated. It would just not be as interesting to look at, and you wouldn't get that same sort of visual feedback. But what aspects of games do you think you absolutely need before you can do anything at all with the game? You've got things like a game engine, machine to run it, input. So the things I kind of thought of with what some of you said already, this way of interacting and moving, which now that I've said it, I guess like you probably could have a game where you don't need to move, but at least some, yeah, this sort of way of inputting as the player, this way of like telling the game what it is that you want to do. And then in response to that, the game reacting to what you're doing. So having this kind of feedback system is probably, as well as like someone said in the chat, like this actual sort of game engine and like machine to run it. I suppose on top of that, this is probably one of the first things you would need to actually have the game in motion. And as yeah, some of you said as well, like the rules and the system for a game. So for all media, including games, this obviously depends a lot on the experience that you're aiming for. But it's kind of interesting thinking about this idea of then at this point, like what is and isn't a game, which is sort of a whole other topic. But hopefully you can see that it's possible to think about the structure of a game in these terms, to think about the experience that you want the player to have and how different components feed into this to add layers on top of this like core game experience of you inputting something into the system and then that outputting something back to you. So with games, a lot of the core experience will be focused around interaction, and also play and exploring some idea or story. So in terms of then making video games, when creating a game, you often need this initial structure that deals with some of these fundamental features that we talked about, so sort of input, and some of the other things on top of that, like physics and lighting. And depending on the type of game, creating this initial structure can be a big undertaking. And in the past and still today, some larger companies and more sort of tech-focused people choose to create code structures that handle these features to fit their specific needs. But there's also pre-made game engines such as Unity, Unreal Engine, Game Maker, for example, that take care of many of these tasks with inbuilt systems for lighting, physics, handling animation, as well as input and output, those kind of things, so that you don't have to start from scratch every time, and you don't have to, you know, do the code that handles those things. And this really helps you get to the creative process a lot faster. So this is a screenshot from the Unity game engine with one of my projects in it. And so you can see this is like a sort of relatively complex project, although on the scale of games as a whole, it's still actually quite a small game. But I wanted to show you Unity before we get into the smaller tools, just to show you the sort of like range of possibilities with game engines that exist. So this shows the 3D environment of the game, and if you can see my cursor, hopefully, then up here we've got the kind of view of, this is like what the developer sees of the scene, so this 3D model of the house, and then below is a view of what the player will see when playing through the game. And engines like these come with a lot of pre-built features that allow you to build complex interactions. So, for example, I've currently got the player themselves selected in my game. And so you can see there's this section in the middle kind of shows these different things within the background of the game that are attached to the player to make the player work. So, for example, I've got this animator on the player, which is a piece of code created by Unity. So I didn't have to write it, and it allows me to set up all the animations with the player. I've also got another one called a rigid body, which is another piece of code created by Unity, and that allows me to set up some of the physics so that they move how I expect them to. So engines like these have a lot of different options, as they are designed to make games of pretty much any genre, and so they're very flexible. But the downside of this is that it can be quite a steep learning curve, and also the more options you have, in my experience, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be more creative. In fact, having access to so many options can mean that it's really hard to decide what to do and how to do it, and it can take longer to get to the point where what you have in your head matches what is on the screen in front of you. So yeah, that's where small tools come in. So to clarify, when I say a tool, I mean a game engine or game development environment. So for example, Unity, like the one I just showed you, or anything that you can kind of use as a way to make a game. But a small tool is something that doesn't generally involve a huge software download or need expensive hardware specifications. Often they can be browser-based or and free, and have minimal coding requirements. These help overcome a lot of external barriers that people face when wanting to make games. I think that getting started with game development can be a daunting thing, and sometimes it can seem inaccessible. I taught myself to code and use tools like Unity over a number of years, and later on I found tools like Bitsy, these small tools, and I found that they really allowed me to express myself in ways that I hadn't been able to before, and they gave me confidence in my ability to design games and complete and share them. And they often kind of provided me with a much more focused workflow, as they contain these inbuilt limitations which can aid the creative process. And I think it's this thing of being able to get to that point quicker, where you can have an idea in your head and then get it down onto the screen. And it's not just, I mean, I also still love using Unity. I just think it's thinking about like what you want to make and what tool is best for making that. And there'd be some projects that you wouldn't be able to achieve with a small tool that something like Unity or Unreal would be a much better option for. So yeah, just as a comparison between the two. So I've got a few images of small tools here to give you an example of like a few different types of them. So this image is Bitsy, which we're going to be looking at in more detail. And this is an image of a tool called Flatpak, which is an Android-based interactive collage maker. So the idea being that you can, if you have it on your phone, you can take pictures of things and then cut them out using just touch, and then place them in a collage, and then you can move through it. This is a screenshot from Twine, which has a couple of different interfaces. I think this is maybe the web, or maybe it's desktop. There's a web and a desktop version anyway. And Twine is used for making mostly text-based choose your own adventure games. So something where you might have, I don't know, you're standing in a path and there's like a cave off to the north and there's a forest off to the west. Where do you want to go? And you can choose to follow different narrative paths. And obviously you can do much more interesting stuff than that. But yeah, and you can add images to it as well. But it's sort of mainly designed for these narrative choose your own adventure games. This is a tool called Flick Game, which is, I guess, kind of another choose your own adventure, but it's all in this sort of Microsoft Paint style format where you click. The way it works is you click on different colors within the image to take you to different screens that you've created. So in this image, I think if you click on the red, then you would go to a different image, and then within that image, maybe you'd click on a blue section and it would take you to another image. And that's again browser based and sort of quite limited in the options it gives you in a creative way. The name of the someone's already answered. Twine was the name of the choose your own adventure tool. And then this one is a screenshot from Puzzle Script, which is a small editor for making puzzle games, 2D puzzle games. And it's more on the code heavy side of things, but still in its own way is quite sort of limited in scope in terms of what you can, the sorts of things that you can create with it, and is very focused on that particular type of game. So I was interested in, again, in the chat, if anyone has used any of these tools or any different tools. It'll be nice to see if anyone has sort of had any experience with making any of these. Including Bitsy. Ooh, GD Studio. Sorry, I'm just opening up GD Studio. Oh, so that's like specifically for making Game Boy games. That's cool.
Yeah, like in the style of. Super cool.
That's very cool. I've not used that. So that's very good. I'm taking back to words. Oh, hang on, I've lost my notes now. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I think Yarn Spinner is quite similar to Twine. There's a few like that. There's one called Ink as well, which you can also integrate into Unity. The one where you pick out the color, pick the color is called Flick Game. I'll just put it in the chat. Scratch is a really nice one, I think, because it sort of introduces you to the logic side of code without you needing to learn all the syntax with code. Roblox. Cool. Awesome. So people have used a few different tools. Yeah, I think it's always like really nice to try out different things, and then you'll find as I guess as I was saying, there's different tools that are useful for different projects. And it's just fun as well, sort of experimenting with what's out there. Flatpak, I believe, is for Android only. I'll just get a link actually for Flatpak. Or perhaps after, maybe what I'll do is afterwards I'll send Lucy some links to all these things and she can send them around to everyone. So I want to start looking at Bitsy in, I guess, in a little bit more detail. So the features on it are a lot more limited in comparison to something like Unity. So it still has these pre-built systems that allow you to get to the creative parts quickly. On top of this, because the system is so contained, it naturally encourages experimentation, because you are able to kind of get to the bounds of the tool faster. And at that point, I don't know, I find like you naturally sort of start thinking, well, this is like, I know what I can do with Bitsy, but there's this one specific thing I want to do. So how can I kind of work around that and extend like what I can do within the tool? It encourages you to sort of stretch your knowledge of the tool, which I find with something larger, I've used Unity for a few years and I still don't feel like I've got to the bounds of what's possible within it. So kind of instead of giving you all the possible resources and saying, now make whatever you want, it gives you one tool that's designed to be accessible and allows you to really dig deep within it and experiment with it. So yeah, why use a smaller game engine? I think I've said some of this already, but it depends on what projects you're working on. Depending on your goals and requirements, different engines might fit your needs better. And larger engines are great for larger projects, perhaps with a 3D environment or more complex interactions. And smaller game engines are really great for getting into a creative headspace really fast and telling stories. So sometimes even it can be a useful starting point for moving on to something larger as a sort of prototyping tool. And enforcing limitations can assist your creative process and help you stay focused while allowing you to gain confidence and experiment with the bounds of what's possible. So yeah, this was the first game that I made in Bitsy, which was I think in late 2017. And I made this because I started seeing Bitsy kind of appearing on my Twitter feed. And I didn't really know what it was. I just saw all these games that had like a really similar style. And I was a bit confused because I just thought there was some kind of thing going on that I didn't know about, and everyone had decided to make pixel art games. But then I discovered that they were all being made in this tool called Bitsy. And I also found out that every month the creator of Bitsy, Adam Ledoux, hosts a game jam, which he still does every month online with a different theme each month. And anyone can create a Bitsy game and submit their game to that game jam. And the theme for the upcoming month was the phrase "a secret." So I decided I wanted to try out Bitsy and try and think of a game that would match this theme. So I kind of started, I ended up kind of going for this like 80s high school drama film story about this girl that's kind of sneaks around and listens to other people's conversations and then stirs up lots of the drama in school. But it was really fun making it and like thinking about all the characters, and I had lots of different like scenes that you could go through and talk to people and find out different things about them. And it took me a couple of weeks of spare time overall, and it's probably still the biggest Bitsy game that I have made. But I was even then noticing that I wasn't having my usual scope problems that I get with games where I'll have an idea and then it will just kind of spiral into this huge thing that I'm probably is going to take me a long time to finish. So yeah, it was really positive experience to actually have an idea and then get to the point where I could create and complete it. I also made a YouTube playlist to go along with it because I wanted to have some music in it, and Bitsy by default doesn't have a way of sort of including music in it. So that's how I got around that side of it. And I put it as like a recommended listening when I uploaded it to my account online. Okay, yeah. The next thing I wanted to do was to go through a really short history of small tools in terms of, I guess, a bit of like recent games history and why small tools are at the place they're at right now. And I hope this works, but I'm going to do it in a Bitsy game that I made. So we'll see. We're experimenting. So can everyone still see this? Yeah, great. what are small tools? A short history. So I'm in a Bitsy game right now, and I'm just moving around with the arrow keys. So I'll go up to people and I'll read out what's happening. So, hi, you want to know more about small tools? We should probably start by defining a game making tool in general. I realise I've said some of this already, so let's keep going. A tool is an engine or game development environment. Some common examples of larger tools are Unity, Unreal, and GameMaker. Talk with the people here and take a look at the resources in the Bitsy library to learn more. A small tool is something that doesn't generally involve a huge software download or need expensive hardware. Specifications. Often they are browser-based, free, and have minimal coding requirements. These help overcome a lot of external barriers that people face when wanting to make games. In the 1980s, games were mostly available in arcades. People would get together to play games here, but the development side of these games was not easily accessible outside of the companies who made them. Soon after this, games started to become available at home too, on consoles such as the BBC Micro and ZX Spectrum. People interested in how the games were made were able to look directly at the source files and experiment with editing them. This was the start of what is known as game modifying or game modding. People shared these game mods, but often locally and physically. For example, over floppy disks or over online bulletin board systems. Knowledge moved slowly and through these small, passionate communities. In the 1990s and early 2000s, games were still hard to access in terms of development. Also, games were harder to edit, as the companies who made them clamped down on pirating and accessing the game's source files became trickier. Games like Doom gained a big modding community, though, as the developer intentionally added level editing tools within the game. Around this time, there were also console emulators being made for PC. The community of indie developers was still very small, but was growing. In the early 2000s, Adobe Flash was a popular tool for creating and distributing games on the internet. Big communities formed around Flash websites, and since it was accessible from school computers, it got a whole generation of kids interested in game development. In the late 2000s, Microsoft's XNA made a big impact on indie development, allowing people to develop and publish onto console, in this case Xbox 360, for the first time. It was mostly free too, so lots of people were able to access it. Yes, RIP Flash. Tools like XNA, WiiWare, and also PC software like GameMaker and RPG Maker led to a boom in commercial games, often associated with games such as Braid, Spelunky, and Super Meat Boy in around 2007. Around this time, many more tools became available alongside factors like home computers becoming more powerful and advances in internet technology and connectivity. These all meant that it became easier and easier for game development tools to exist, to be available and to people and stay updated. It was also easier for people to publish and share games and to generate communities around them worldwide. In the last decade or so, game development tools have made a resurgence. They are much more accessible and contain pre-built engines that take care of many fundamental aspects of games, such as physics. These larger tools allowed individuals or small teams to make fairly large projects. They are also getting progressively more accessible, for example, using visual coding and having low or zero initial costs. These days, there are also lots of hobbyist and smaller scale tools that don't require a big software download or powerful computer to run them. They tend to be easy to learn and have active communities around them who share knowledge and distribute games. Bitsy is an example of one of these smaller tools. And I think I didn't put in a particularly an end, so I think that's where it ends. But yeah, I hope that was informative in some way. I should probably take a moment actually now to see if anyone has any questions about anything I've said so far. Or someone did say what happened to Flash. Oh yeah, it was discontinued. Boosting up through instructions.
Everyone's just talking about Flash now.
Yeah. Yeah, the ones I mentioned, the Bitsy micro ZX collection. But I'm sure there was other ones around that time that you could sort of like get into the source files as well. Yeah, I'm glad that worked. So what was I up to? Yeah, we'll probably take a break in a few minutes as well. I'll just do the next couple of little bits of, which was, oh yeah, I was going to show a couple of other examples of Bitsy games so that you get a sense of the kind of range of things that are being created by people. So I'll just go through the first couple on this list. And then again, I'll probably send this list around to Lucy to share with all of you as well. Yeah, this one is called Zen Garden, Portland, the day before my wedding. And it is created by a creator called Cephalopodunk. I really like this one because it's just very small and contained, and it kind of shows like a lot of the basic Bitsy interactions. So I'm here walking around, and this is it's just this one screen in this Bitsy game. And it's kind of like a diary entry where you can go and talk to these different stones, pillars in this garden. Yeah, the artwork is amazing. It's so simple, but it's really effective. You can kind of tell what's going on. And then the other one I wanted to show is called I Wonder, and it's made by someone who's called Sean. And in this one, I'm actually this little thought bubble moving around. And the way that they created this game, I can then go up to someone and then I become the thought bubble of that person, and I can hear what they're thinking. So they say, I wonder when the next bus comes by. Then this person is wondering if that person knows when the next bus comes by, which I think is nice. And I can go up here and see what the bird's thinking. And if these trees have fruit. I wonder what it's like. I'll do one more. I wonder if I'll ever have time to appreciate them. And I really like this one because it's very kind of slow and thoughtful, and it uses the idea of like what the player is in a really interesting way.